It began with something so ordinary that no one could have predicted the storm buried inside it. At 10:17 a.m., March 15th, 1986, Evan Maxford, an electronics technician with a clean security record and an even cleaner life, walked into a Toys R Us to fulfill a simple promise to his youngest son. No one there, not even Evan himself, realized that the shoebox-sized console he placed in his shopping cart would soon expose one of the most elegant espionage operations of the Cold War. To the cashier, it was merely an Atari 2600 Junior, cost-reduced plastic, a rainbow stripe, and a price that slid neatly under $50. To Evan, it was a gift for a kid who still believed video games were magic. But inside this mundane purchase, somewhere between the molded black casing and the silicon, was a thread that, once pulled, would unravel a hidden pipeline of stolen American military secrets. That afternoon, Evan watched his son connect the machine to their family room television, the way millions of American children had done since the late 70s. The picture flickered, the familiar yellow Pac-Man character blinked to life, and the Maxford house settled into the comforting monotony of a weekend. This was suburban America, safe, predictable, insulated from the brutal chess match between Washington and Moscow. 3 weeks later, a garage sale on Gainsborough Drive would shift the story. Evans spotted a cardboard box of Atari cartridges, 8 of them priced at $10. Titles he recognized, titles he didn't, and one anomaly, a plain white label with cheap black text that read, Space Battle 2. His son grabbed River Raid first. But the plain cartridge, heavier, slightly rougher, somehow wrong, remained untouched at the bottom of the box. And yet, this unremarkable piece of plastic was not a toy at all. It was a container, a vault, a message in plain sight. When Max later jammed the cartridge into the console and turned the power switch, the TV stayed pitch black. No bleeps, no sprites, no error screen, just silence. But silence often hides the loudest truths. And within days, curiosity would push Evan to crack the plastic shell open, unaware that he was staring at circuitry never meant to be seen by civilian eyes. He wouldn't know it yet, but he was holding stolen blueprints of America's fighter jet electronic warfare systems, compressed, encrypted, disguised as a broken children's game. The Cold War had found its way into his living room. Evan didn't open the cartridge out of paranoia or suspicion. He opened it because he was the kind of man who refused to let a broken object sit unanswered. On April 8th, after a long shift repairing secure communication hardware, he sat alone in his garage with a halogen lamp and a Phillips screwdriver, expecting nothing more than a cracked solder joint or a burnt ROM chip. But the moment the casing split apart, something in his mind clicked, an instinct, born from 20 years of handling electronics that were never meant to reach the public. Inside Space Battle 2 was a board that did not belong to 1,980 consumer hardware. 3 chips, not 1. Dense, deliberate traces. Custom logic. No manufacturer markings. No serials. No production stamps. And a weight, subtle but undeniable, that suggested additional layers under the board's surface. None of this matched Atari's famously cheap cartridge design philosophy. Evan leaned closer. A faint code. 8417. Not a batch number. Not a spec. Not anything he recognized. The chip texture and substrate color were equally wrong. Too matte, too coarse. Not Taiwanese. Not Japanese. Certainly not domestic. When military-trained instincts whisper, they usually whisper one word: foreign. But Evan wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. He took notes, sketched the board, and reassembled the casing with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of classified mistakes. Then he did what technicians with clearances are taught to do. He sought a second set of eyes. The next morning, inside the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet order of the hardware development lab, he placed the cartridge on the desk of Carl Hutcherson, MIT, Ph.D., NSA veteran, A man whose intuition for anomalous circuitry bordered on supernatural. Carl didn't speak for several minutes. He didn't need to. His brow tightened. His fingers traced the logic lines like someone reading a confession letter. Then finally, he said the sentence that made the room tilt. "These chips are Soviet-made." Evan felt a coldness behind his ribs. Carl continued, unblinking. "Soviet substrate materials, Soviet casting texture, Soviet package geometry. The engineering was too advanced, too purposeful, too expensive for bootlegs." And then the part Evan dreaded. This wasn't a hobbyist project. This wasn't a mod. This wasn't anything innocent. It was deliberate infiltration disguised as disposable plastic. Carl made Evan write down every detail: where he got it, who sold it, how it was handled, and then delivered the verdict. "You have to report this. Immediately. And officially." That night, Evan dialed the FBI. He thought he was reporting an odd curiosity. He had no idea he had just triggered the reopening of a dormant espionage channel, one that had been silently bleeding American secrets into Soviet hands for years. The FBI didn't react the way Evan expected. When he called on April 10th, the agent on duty listened politely, took notes, asked procedural questions, but his tone never shifted. No urgency, no alarm. Just another item in a day packed with domestic disputes, fraud cases, and dozens of false espionage tips from anxious citizens still living under the long shadow of the Cold War. By the time Evan hung up, he felt almost foolish. The next morning, he carried the cartridge into the Washington field office, carefully boxed, labeled, and wrapped like fragile evidence. Two agents, Mark Rivera and Dennis Cole, met him in a plain interview room that smelled of old carpet and lukewarm coffee. They treated him with respect, but not seriousness. Rivera asked him to retell the series of events. Cole photographed the board. They documented the chip markings, took his written statement, logged his clearance level, and then the entire case slipped into the quiet inertia that consumes half of federal leads. The cartridge was placed in an evidence locker, and then nothing happened. For 11 months. Not because Evan was wrong, not because the danger wasn't real, but because the FBI was drowning. 1,986 had been called the Year of the Spy. The Walker family spy ring. Agents selling secrets to Moscow. Naval officers leaking intel. CIA turncoats. Defense contractor moles. Every week, another fire. Every month, another arrest. Every day, another crisis demanding immediate manpower. Compared to those, a weird Atari cartridge simply didn't scream national emergency. Inside that locked cabinet, dust collected on the plastic casing that hid fighter jet secrets worth billions. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Investigation turned its attention elsewhere, unaware that they were ignoring the only physical clue to a smuggling operation hiding inside American living rooms. And so the cartridge slept. Until March 1987. When a directive arrived from Director William Webster himself. A bureaucratic reshuffle, a push to analyze seized electronics more systematically. Most items would prove worthless, but one item, one forgotten video game cartridge, would crack open a mystery the Bureau never knew it had. The cartridge slipped back into the light, and for the first time, someone with the right tools would finally examine it with the seriousness it deserved. The cartridge arrived at Quantico on March 24th, 1,987, 11 months after Evan had first placed it on the FBI's table. This time, instead of being photographed and shelved, it landed on the workbench of someone with the rare combination of youth, obsession, and technical fluency. The 1,980 seconds digital world desperately lacked. His name was Peter Voss, 28 years old, with a computer science degree, a habit of skipping lunch, and a reputation for unraveling strange circuitry like a puzzle meant only for him. When he cracked open the cartridge casing and slid the board under magnification, he paused not at the chips themselves, but at the intentionality of their arrangement. Head worked on consoles. Head traced microcode. Head disassembled enough hardware to know what belonged where. And nothing about this belonged in a commercial game. Voss desoldered the EEPROM, the heart of any 2600 cartridge, and inserted it into a reader. Hex code appeared in glowing green lines on his monitor, instead of game logic, sprite definitions, or jump tables. The data formed dense patterns with uniform distribution. Too structured for corruption. Too irregular for a game engine. Too layered for anything short of encryption. This wasn't an accident. It was a container, a vault disguised as failure. Voss sent chip photographs to the CIA's materials group. Weeks later, the message came back. Soviet fabrication, likely from a Moscow-area military electronics facility. That confirmation flipped the investigation's internal classification overnight. Voss continued analyzing the ROM, but every statistical test led to the same conclusion. The data had been compressed, obfuscated, and locked behind logic that didn't exist in any Western encryption reference. He needed help. The Bureau didn't have it, but Fort Meade did. In April 1987, he forwarded the full ROM dump to the NSA Cryptanalysis Division. It took them 7 months. 7 months of reverse engineering Soviet logic gates, simulating the custom decoder chip, emulating its unique, proprietary transformation algorithm, reconstructing memory flow from the Soviet controller chip testing, known Warsaw Pact cipher. Families brute forcing the data structure to find a mathematical pattern. The breakthrough arrived on November 18th, 1987. The decoder logic was finally emulated in software. The encrypted blocks unfolded, the compressed structures expanded, and for the first time in 19 months, the NSA saw the cartridge's true content spill across the screen. It was not a game. It was never meant to be played. It was a secret delivery vector. The ROM contained classified electronic warfare specifications for U.S. F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, data so sensitive that even mentioning it required special authorization. The cartridge was a smuggling tool, a Trojan horse, a courier that could slip through checkpoints because it looked like a child's toy. And someone inside the U.S. defense industry had built it. When the NSA decrypted the cartridge's contents, the alarms didn't ring, they detonated. Within hours, encrypted phone lines lit up between Fort Meade and the FBI's counterintelligence division. The information inside the cartridge wasn't just sensitive, it was mission-critical, the kind of data that determined whether American pilots lived or died in the split-second chaos of electronic warfare. The ROM held radar warning receiver parameters, frequency response curves, countermeasure timing algorithms, and vulnerability assessments for 2 of America's premier fighter aircraft. This wasn't amateur espionage. This wasn't ideological betrayal. This was industrial-grade intelligence exfiltration. And the method was terrifyingly elegant. A small plastic cartridge, cheap, unregulated, universally ignored, and capable of crossing any checkpoint without a second glance. An object that could be mailed, traded, gifted, or forgotten in a shoebox. A vessel that could hide inside the chaos of American consumer culture. It was, in every sense, the perfect disguise. On December 8th, 1987, agents Rivera and Cole arrived again at the Maxford home, this time with hardened expressions and federal urgency. Evan opened the door, expecting casual follow-up. Instead, he found 2 men who now understood that the broken game from a garage sale had nearly slipped past history. They needed every detail reconstructed. The street, the house, the widow, the box of cartridges. But the story was already crumbling. When the agents reached the house on Gainsborough Drive, Mrs. Vasquez was gone dead from natural causes months earlier. Her belongings scattered, her trail dissolved, and the only person who might know how the cartridge entered her home was her grandson. Thomas, now 23, was as shocked as the agents when they questioned him. His Atari phase had ended years earlier. He barely remembered the games. The titles blurred together in teenage nostalgia. But Space Battle 2? A shadow. A maybe. A vague recollection that it might have come from a lunch period trade with someone from computer class. A name surfaced. Trey Orwell. A dead end waiting to happen. When questioned, Trey remembered Thomas but not the cartridge. He had owned an Atari, yes. He had traded games, yes. But everything he'd sold or swapped in 1983 dissolved into the fog of adolescence. The FBI hit quicksand. No receipts, no documentation, no traceable chain of custody. Just a single plastic artifact that had already passed through too many hands over too many years. Yet, one truth became impossible to ignore. If one Soviet-engineered cartridge reached a garage sale, then others had reached their intended destination. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was a leak, a pipeline, a covert artery feeding American military secrets into Moscow through the most unsuspected courier imaginable. And the Bureau had discovered it by accident because one father refused to throw away a broken game. By early 1988, the investigation had expanded far beyond Evan, far beyond the garage sale, far beyond anything the FBI could comfortably contain. The cartridge was no longer an object, it was a question mark hanging over the entire American defense industry. If this encoded data came from inside U.S. military systems, then someone with access, skill, and motive had built the cartridge. But who? The FBI began the only approach available. Reverse the leak. The stolen specifications linked back to two major defense giants, Raytheon and Hughes, aircraft companies with sprawling facilities, thousands of employees, and labyrinths of subcontractors. Anyone with a secret or top-secret clearance who touched electronic warfare systems was now a potential suspect. The Bureau built a list. It wasn't short. Engineers, programmers, test technicians, electronic warfare specialists, clerks, maintenance staff, suppliers, subcontracted coders, and even janitorial staff with access to sensitive areas. Thousands of names. Too many places to look. Too few leads to follow. The FBI cross-referenced personnel files with known Soviet sympathizers, checked travel patterns for suspicious trips, pulled bank records for unexplained income. They searched for employees with unusual hobbies, engineering backgrounds, or access to Atari hardware. Nothing. No spikes, no anomalies, no money trails, no suspicious travel, no ideological footprints. It was as if the suspect had been designed, like the cartridge itself, to leave no fingerprints. The FBI even re-evaluated the possibility that Trey Orwell might be connected not because of evidence, but because he was the only name the investigators had. A high school computer kid in 1981, now a quiet software developer in Northern Virginia. But Trey had never worked in defense, never held a clearance, never touched military hardware, never had access to the stolen data. The Bureau tried something desperate. What if the cartridge had originally been a dead drop? A Soviet courier system disguised as a popular toy, meant to be exchanged hand to hand through the noise of American life. The cartridges could be traded, gifted, bought secondhand, swapped across flea markets and garage sales, completely invisible to security checks. The brutal realization emerged. The cartridge in Evan's garage was never supposed to end up with him. It should have been intercepted by a handler. It should have passed through a cutout. It should have been collected quietly and smuggled home. But something broke the chain. Someone failed to recover it. And the world only discovered the operation because a bored 2-year-old tried to play a game that wasn't a game. By March 1988, every path forward collapsed into mist. No suspects, no courier, no origin point, no evidence beyond the cartridge itself. An espionage network existed. But the spy, the courier, the mastermind, they were ghosts, invisible, untouchable, and already gone. By spring 1988, The FBI's investigation had become a paradox. They had uncovered the method, the payload, the engineering, even the damage, yet they had no suspect, no handler, no motive, and no origin point. It was the closest the Bureau had ever come to solving a case while simultaneously solving nothing at all. Inside classified briefings, analysts began reconstructing what the operation must have looked like. A cleared defense employee, someone with deep technical access, built custom EEPROM cartridges. Inside each one, they encoded stolen military specifications using Soviet-made logic chips. The cartridges were disguised as defective games, their failures intentional. No child would play them, no parent would complain, no store would honor a return. Once prepared, the cartridges moved into public circulation through the most undetectable networks imaginable. Garage sales, flea markets, used game bins, neighborhood swaps, thrift stores, even schoolyard trades between teenagers. Every transaction was untraceable. Every exchange offered the same defense. It came from someone I don't remember who. If a courier retrieved the cartridge, the system worked flawlessly. If a target missed a pickup, the cartridge simply vanished into American clutter. The FBI realized something chilling. This was espionage designed to survive failure. If 10 cartridges were planted, 7 might be lost, 2 might be destroyed, 1 might reach the Soviet collector, and 1 was enough. That design philosophy, redundancy through chaos, made the operation nearly impossible to dismantle. Worse, the smuggling method exploited 2 blind spots in U.S. national security. Consumer electronics were never inspected. A toy could cross any military checkpoint without scrutiny. Civilian-to-civilian exchanges were unmonitored. Government surveillance had no visibility into children trading games on playgrounds. For the first time, the FBI confronted a truth they had not wanted to articulate. A foreign intelligence service had weaponized American consumer culture. Cartridges didn't need diplomatic pouches. They didn't need encryption briefcases. They didn't need contacts in shadowed alleys. They just needed America's obsession with cheap entertainment. By late 1988, internal reports quietly acknowledged the inevitable. The Soviets probably had the data. Multiple cartridges had likely reached their destination. The leak had already completed its purpose years earlier. All the FBI had recovered was a fragment, one shard of a larger machine, already dismantled and gone. And the operation, whatever code name the KGB gave it, left no trace, because it never needed one. By the end of 1988, the investigation met its quiet death, not through failure, but through inevitability. Every agent involved reached the same conclusion. The cartridge was a message from the past, a relic of an operation already completed, already dissolved, already erased. What they were studying was not an active threat, only the shadow left behind. The FBI sealed the case under an internal designation meant for unresolved counterintelligence incidents. No press release, no declassified memo, no acknowledgement that American fighter jet secrets had once traveled the same route as used comic books and lawn sale casserole dishes. In September, Evan Maxford received a polite letter thanking him for his cooperation. It included nothing about the severity of what he had uncovered, nothing about the NSA, the decrypted data, or the fact that his accidental curiosity had exposed a breach worth billions. The letter made the entire affair sound like a harmless anomaly, and so Evan returned to his life, his workshop, his radios, his family, his routine. He never knew what he had stopped or failed to stop. He never learned how close his discovery came to disappearing unnoticed forever. He never learned how many cartridges actually existed, or how many had been successfully retrieved by Soviet handlers. But the intelligence community understood one thing with absolute clarity. The smuggling pipeline worked. The Soviets received the data. The U.S. never identified the mole. The cartridge was only the smallest surviving particle of a system designed to leave no survivors. When the Cold War ended in 1991 and the Soviet Union collapsed, The classified files remained untouched, frozen in time like insects in amber. New threats emerged, new adversaries, new forms of espionage. The Atari cartridge became a footnote, then a memory, then a myth whispered by a handful of analysts who remembered the days when Moscow hid secrets inside plastic toys. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. There was no arrest, no unmasked spy, no televised perp walk, just a forgotten box at a garage sale, and a father who refused to ignore a broken game. A toy had carried classified American technology across invisible borders. A child had nearly played a top-secret data archive. And a global intelligence war had briefly surfaced in a suburban living room, only to vanish again without leaving answers. Some stories end in revelation. This one ended the only way perfect espionage ever does, with silence.